Or pour 5W30 in that 3.0T Quattro and you're cooking the bearings inside a year, says Klaus Werner, a VW master technician with 22 years inside Audi service bays. Pour 0W40 in that same Quattro and you're wasting the customer's money on a marketing grade oil they don't need, says Danny Ruiz, who manages one of the busiest quick lube franchises in the Phoenix metro and has signed off on more Audi oil changes than most dealerships do in a quarter. Two experts, same engine, two completely opposite recommendations. And the owner standing between them, holding a dipstick and a receipt for an oil they're suddenly not sure about, is the one who pays for whichever expert is wrong. So which one is it? Why does Audi spec 0W40 for the turbocharged Quattros, while half the independent shops in America pour 5W30 into them anyway? And does the difference actually reach the crankshaft? The stakes here aren't theoretical. The 3.0T supercharged V6, the 2.0T EA8 in its various generations, and the high-strung RS spec engines all share a common trait. They run hot, they run boosted, and they ask a lot. From the thin film of oil sitting between a spinning bearing and a load it doesn't want. When that film thins out, even briefly, the metal-on-metal contact doesn't announce itself with a knock the next morning. It announces itself 80,000 miles later, when the timing chain tensioner finally rattles loud enough to scare you on a cold start in a parking garage, and the diagnostic printout says, "Where?" That should have taken 300,000 kilometers to show up, has shown up at 180. Some owners report oil consumption climbing from a quart every 5,000 miles to a quart every 1,500. And they swear nothing changed. Nothing they noticed anyway. The oil grade did, the brand did. The drain interval crept, and the engine, which doesn't read the receipt, just kept running the only way it knows how on whatever was poured in. But here's where it gets interesting. The argument between Klaus and Danny isn't really about 0W40 versus 5W30. It's about a 4-digit number printed on the back of every quality European oil jug, VW502 Stozero, and its longer life cousin, VW504 Suzueros. Understand those two specs, and the debate stops being opinion and starts being chemistry. Let's set up who's actually speaking. Klaus Werner trained at a VW Audi apprenticeship program in Wolfsburg in the early 2000s, came stateside in 2007, and has been the lead tech at an independent European specialty shop in the Pacific Northwest ever since. His base sees Quattros with 180,000 miles still running their original turbo. He keeps an oil analysis log on every customer. Car that comes in for more than 3 services. He's the kind of mechanic who will pull a valve cover just to show you what carbon looks like at 120K on the wrong oil. Danny Ruiz runs 3 quick lube locations across the Phoenix Valley. He's not a master tech, and he'd be the first to tell you so. What he is a high-volume operator who has read every OEM spec book on his shelf, attended Valvoline and mobile training seminars, and seen what works when you have 10 minutes per car and a customer who wants the cheapest sticker on the windshield. His argument isn't lazy, it's economic, and it has a real technical basis. Both men deserve a fair hearing because both have a point, and the truth as usual lives in the middle, and depends on which engine, which climate, and which mileage. Most people don't know this, but the VW 502.000 specification, which Audi has stamped on its turbocharged gas engines for over 20 years, isn't a viscosity requirement. It's a performance requirement. Specifically, it demands an oil that maintains a minimum high-temperature, high-shear viscosity, HTHS, of 3.5 centipoise at 150 degrees Celsius. Think of HTHS, like the structural beam strength of the oil film at the exact temperature and pressure where a bearing is screaming for help. A regular 5W30 sold for a Honda or a Toyota might have an HTHS of 2.9, sometimes 3.0. Beautiful for fuel economy. Catastrophic for a 3.0T running boost. On a Saturday or canyon drive when oil temps climb past 130 Celsius and the rod bearings are asking the film to please not collapse. A genuine 502.0 approved 5W30, like Castrol Edge Professional or Liqui Moly Top Tech, meets that 3.5 HTHS floor. A non-approved 5W30 from the parts store shelf often does not. That's the first fork in the road, and it's where 90% of the confusion lives. When Danny says 5W30 is fine, he means 502 approved 5W30. When the owner hears 5W30, they hear the orange jug their cousin uses on his F-150. Those are not the same fluid. They share 2 numbers and nothing else. Wait until you see the HTHS difference at the temperatures these engines actually run. The 0W40 Mobil 1 European formula that Audi pours from the factory, its HTHS sits around 3.8, sometimes pushing 3.9. A 502 approved 5W30 sits at 3.5, occasionally 3.6. That's a roughly 9% thicker oil film at operating temperature when you choose the 0W40. 9% doesn't sound like much until you remember the bearing clearance. On a hot 3.0T crankshaft is measured in tens of microns. 9% of microns is the difference between hydrodynamic lubrication and boundary lubrication, between metal floating on a film and metal kissing metal. Picture it this way. The bearing is a swimmer, the oil film is the pool. At 3.5 HTHS, the pool is regulation depth. The swimmer can stroke freely. At 3.8, the pool is the same plus an extra hand width of water. The swimmer is still swimming. But at 2.9, which is what a non-approved 5W30 might deliver under heavy load, the swimmer's hands are scraping the bottom. They're still moving, but the friction is now wearing them down with every stroke. That wear is invisible at idle. It only shows up when the oil's analyzed. At the next change, and the iron particles per million have crept up from 12 to 47, and the owner has no idea why. Pay attention to this number, because it's the one nobody mentions at the counter. NOACK volatility. That's the percentage of oil that evaporates when held at 250 degrees Celsius for 1 hour. A 0W40 European formula typically tests at around 8 to 9% NOACK. A budget 5W30, even one labeled synthetic, can test at 13, 14, sometimes 15%. What evaporates doesn't lubricate. It exits the engine as oil vapor through the PCV system gets pulled back into the intake tract, lands on the back of the intake valves of a direct injection engine, and bakes into the carbon crust that 2.0T EA888 owners know by name. The carbon buildup story isn't just a fuel injection problem, it's also an oil vaporization problem, and lower NOACK oils may reduce the rate at which that crust forms. That smell, the warm, slightly dry, almost peppery scent rising off a Quattro that just finished a Saturday morning drive through the canyons, part of that is the engine bay's heat. Part of it is the trace amount of oil vapor that any direct injection turbocharged engine produces under load. A lower NOACK oil reduces how much of that vapor exists in the first place. Evidence suggests that's one reason Audi's long-life formulations have trended toward lower volatility every model year. This part will make you check your last oil receipt. There's a second specification stacked on top of 502, and it's the one that separates 0W40 from 5W30 even more sharply. VW504-0. The 504 spec is Audi's long-life requirement, designed for extended drain intervals. The variable service indicator that some Audi owners take as gospel and stretch to 15, sometimes 17,000 miles between changes. The 504 oils are also low SAPs, meaning low in sulfated ash, phosphorus, and sulfur. They're gentler on catalytic converters and particulate filters. Most quality 0W40 European specs oils carry both 502 and 504 approvals on the label. Most 5W30 oils carry 504, but depending on formulation, may or may not carry 502 alongside it. Read that again. A 5W30 sold as a long-life oil might be 504 only. A 5W30 sold as a 502 approved oil might not have the long-life credential. The two specs aren't interchangeable, and the polymer chemistry inside the bottle is different. The 504 oils lean on more shear stable viscosity index improvers, the long-chain polymers that let a 0W oil behave like a 30 weight when hot. Cheaper polymers shear down under sustained high temperature load. Within 5,000 miles, that beautiful 5W30 you poured in can behave more like a 5W20 at operating temperature. The HTHS drops, the film thins, and the engine that asked for 3.5 centipoise is suddenly getting 3.1, and nobody told the bearings. The 0W40 formulations. Audi specs use higher-end polymer packages, often star-shaped polymers with better shear resistance. They hold their grade longer, they cost more. They're harder to find on a Tuesday afternoon when the customer wants a 5-quart jug. And that, in one sentence, is Danny Ruiz's entire argument. Most people don't know this, but the 2.0 TEA888 has a quirk that makes the oil debate even sharper. The timing chain tensioner on the early Gen 2 versions of that engine, particularly between 2008 and around 2012, became notorious for failure. The tensioner relies on oil pressure to hold tension on a chain that runs the camshafts. When oil pressure drops at hot idle on a thinner-than-spec oil, the tensioner can ratchet back. On a cold start, before pressure builds, the chain can slap. Owners describe it as a brief, diesel-like rattle in the first half-second of cranking. Some owners report that rattle showing up earlier on engines run on thinner, non-approved 5W30 oils. Others have run nothing but bargain 5W30 their whole ownership and never heard a thing. The variable is real, but it's not a guarantee in either direction. Klaus's position is that the 0W40, with its higher HTHS, gives the tensioner a thicker hydraulic medium to grip on. In many cases, he says, switching a high mileage E8 from a borderline 5 to WW30 to a proper 502, 504, 0-40 has quieted the cold start whine within 2 or 3 oil changes. He keeps a notebook. He shows it to customers. The pattern isn't proof, but it's a pattern. Danny's position is that the engineering tolerances on the 2.0T were designed around 502 approved oils, and a proper 502 approved 5W30 meets every minimum requirement. He points out, fairly, that the early Mark V and Mark VI 2.0T engines were originally spec'd for a 5W40 in some markets, and that Audi's transition to 0W40 in newer model years had as much to do with cold start fuel economy and emissions as it did with raw protection. He's not wrong about that either. The 0W40 flows faster at cold cranking. Its pumpability at minus 30 Celsius is measurably better than any 5W30, which means oil reaches the cam bearings and the timing chain tensioner a fraction of a second sooner on a frozen January morning in Minneapolis. That fraction of a second is most of the wear on a modern engine. Industry studies have suggested that somewhere between 60 and 75% of measurable engine wear happens in the first 30 seconds after a cold start. The 0W rating isn't a luxury for cold climates. It's a survival rating. And that's not even the worst part. The 5W30s that don't carry 502 approval are sometimes the ones quick lube chains stocked by the drum, because they're cheap and they pass for most American engines. Some of those oils are blended for fuel economy testing protocols, which reward thin films. The result is an oil that's brilliant at squeezing an extra tenth of a mile per gallon out of a Camry, and dangerous at carrying the load inside a boosted Quattro. The owner gets the same sticker, the same timestamp, the same 3 rotations on the rotisserie hoist. The bottle says synthetic. The HTHS doesn't. Picture the dipstick under the service light. Fresh 0W40 European formula reads as a deep golden honey, almost amber at the edge where it clings to the steel. Fresh 5W30, even a quality one, reads slightly lighter, more straw than honey, a touch less viscous in how it beads down the stick. The visual difference is subtle. The chemical difference, after 15,000 miles of variable interval long life driving in a 3.0T, is not subtle at all. Now to the fight. Klaus first. His position, stated plainly, any turbocharged Audi engine built after 2008 that's spec'd for VW 502 should receive a 0W40 European formula oil that carries both 502.0 and 504.0 approvals, particularly if the car lives north of the 40th parallel, sees temperatures below freezing for any meaningful stretch of the year, or has crossed 80,000 miles. He'll concede that a 502 approved 5W30 is technically inside spec for engines where 502 is the listed approval. He won't concede that it's optimal. He argues the HTHS headroom, the lower NOACK, the better polymer shear stability, and the cold pumpability of the 0W40 add up to an oil that costs maybe $12 more per change and may extend the life of the timing chain tensioner, the turbocharger center bearings, and the PCV system by enough miles to pay for itself 10 times over. He doesn't think Audi's spec sheet is wrong. He thinks the spec sheet is a floor, not a ceiling, and that owners pouring the bare minimum approved oil are choosing the floor. Now, Danny. His position, stated just as plainly, a 502 approved 5W30 from a reputable brand, Castrol Edge 5W30LL, Liquimoli 5W30, Longtime High-Tech Mobile 1 ESP 5W30, meets every requirement Audi publishes. The HTHS is above 3.5. The long life approval is there. The cost per quart is meaningfully lower. Availability is dramatically better, which means an owner whose car needs a top-off on a Sunday in a small town isn't stuck choosing between an emergency dealer trip and a non-approved bottle. Danny argues that the marginal protection difference between a quality 502 5W30 and a quality 502 504 0W40 on an engine driven normally in a temperate climate is small enough that the data doesn't justify the price gap. He'd rather see an owner change a 5W30 every 7,000 miles than stretch a 0W40 to 15. The interval, he says, matters more than the grade, as long as the grade clears the spec. Both arguments have merit. Both have a real audience. The owner who tracks her car twice a year and drives Phoenix to LA in summer needs Klaus's answer. The owner who commutes 30 miles round trip in San Diego with one yearly trip to the mountains and a religious 7,000-mile change cadence can live happily with Danny's. So how does an owner decide? Conditional logic. If your Audi is a 3.0T supercharged V6, an RS spec engine, or any 2.0T E8 888 past 80,000 miles, then a 502 504 approved 0W40 European formula is the safer technical choice, based on HTHS headroom and shear stability evidence. If your Audi is a stock 2.0T under 80,000 miles driven, in a mild climate, on a strict 7,000 to 8,000 mile interval, then a 502 approved 5W30 from a Tier 1 brand is genuinely within spec and may serve you well, provided you verify the 502 stamp on the back of the jug yourself. If you live somewhere that sees real winter, sustained sub-freezing temperatures, cold starts at minus 15 Celsius or colder, the 0W rating becomes more than a preference. The cold pumpability advantage of 0W40 over 5W30 at startup is measurable and meaningful, regardless of mileage. If you stretch your oil changes to the variable long life indicator, you need a 504 approved oil, full stop. A 502 only 5W30 is not formulated for 15,000 mile drains, no matter how clean it looks on the dipstick at mile 12,000. The physical action this week is small and worth doing. Pull your last oil change receipt. Look at what was poured in. If it says only the viscosity grade, with no mention of VW 502.0 or VW 504.0, walk back to that shop and ask, politely, which specific brand and product they used. Then look that product up. The technical data sheet, which any reputable oil manufacturer publishes openly, will list the approvals. If 502.0 isn't there, you have your answer. If your owner's manual, Spec's long life service in 504.0 isn't there, you have your second answer. Then, while you're at the dipstick, look at the oil itself. If it's been more than 5,000 miles, check the color. Golden and translucent means the additive package is still working. Black and opaque doesn't automatically mean disaster. Diesel spec engines run black almost immediately, but on a gas Quattro, deep darkening before 6,000 miles can be a sign of high soot operation, often correlated with carbon-prone direct injection conditions, and worth a conversation with your tech. If you've been running a non-approved 5W30, you don't need to panic drain it. Evidence suggests that switching to a proper 502, 504, AW40 at your next scheduled service, and then running a slightly shortened interval of about 5,000 miles for that first change, can support a clean transition without shocking any seals. After that, you can settle into the manufacturer's recommended cadence with the correct oil. Listen for the cold start tensioner whine on the EA8888. It's a brief mechanical sound in the first half second of cranking, often described as a soft cassette deck rattle. If you hear it consistently, document it, and bring it up with a qualified Audi tech before assuming any oil change alone will fix it. The tensioner may already need replacement, and no viscosity choice will undo wear that's mechanical. The bigger picture is this. Audi's specification reviewed against real-world independent shop data points in the same direction Klaus argues. Danny's economic argument reviewed against the published 502, minimums, also holds for a narrower set of conditions. The owners who get into trouble are usually the ones who fall between running a non-approved 5W30 on a long life interval in a cold climate in a high mileage car, and assuming that because the jug said synthetic, it also said safe. The spec sheet shows otherwise. The soft turbo whistle on a healthy Quattro at part throttle is one of the best sounds in modern German engineering. Keeping it that way for 200,000 miles isn't about choosing the most expensive oil on the shelf. It's about matching the oil's approvals to the engine's actual specification, the climate's actual demand, and the mileage's actual stage of wear. That's a question with a knowable answer, and the answer is printed on the back of the jug, if you know where to look. If this cleared up the 502 versus 504 question, hit subscribe. More European spec breakdowns coming.